Hi, welcome to another episode of I Own a Business, where we focus on helping practice owners grow the practice of their dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Vargo, and I have with me Jill Johnson. And Jill is VP of Human Resources with IDOC. And Jill and I are going to talk about something I think is a real gap in the skill set of a lot of employers and OD practice owners, and that's how to be a good interviewer. So hello, Jill.
Hello.
Jill, as you know, what inspired this interview is I occasionally get asked to be on an interview committee or interview panel, which is a handful of people on the IDOC team that will interview a candidate, and then we convene later to share our notes and what our thoughts were on the interview. And on one of those calls, we started sharing some best practices for interviewing. And you have more experience than I do. And I really learned a lot from you on that call. And I thought that would benefit others who are perhaps just winging it when it comes to interviewing. And I think you'll agree that interviewing is not a perfect science, but I think we can really shift the odds in our favor of hiring somebody who's going to be a good fit if we better understand what constitutes a good interview. So maybe before we jump into the questions, for people who don't know you, maybe just give a little bit about yourself and your role with IDOC.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I joined IDOC in 2019, new to the eye care industry, but not new to HR. I have 20 plus years of human resources experience, large and small businesses. So I come with really a breadth of HR experience working with different industries that I brought to IDOC.
So Jill, we jump in here. Something I hear a lot is that when we put a job ad out there, we get overwhelmed with a lot of resumes from some of the more popular sites, and you have to weed through a lot of them because a lot of them might not necessarily be a good fit for that position. So I'm just curious, before calling a candidate to schedule an interview, what do you look for in a resume?
Yeah, it's a good question because that is the first step of the interview process. And some roles we see a lot of traffic, a lot of resumes come through. Some more niche roles, we may not see as many resumes, but that is the first important step for identifying a qualified candidate. And so what I typically look for in a resume is, one, is it easy to read? For most recruiters, most hiring managers, I mean, you're talking about less than 30 seconds that they're giving or the impression that they have on a candidate through their resume. And that's accurate. I spend very little time scanning through a resume. So the first thing I look for is, is it constructed well? Is it easy to read? Is it easy to follow the career progression, the years of experience, the type of experience that they have? Do they have a LinkedIn link on their resume? That's very helpful because that just tells another part of the story. If I can go to their LinkedIn profile in addition to their resume, and I'll look at education. The grammar errors are a no-no. So especially if we're looking for a position that needs to be precise, say we're looking to fill a bookkeeper position, a grammar error or multiple grammar errors might be indicative of something more serious, that maybe somebody is not as organized or attention to detail, and that competency may be a key competency or is a key competency that we would look for in, say, a bookkeeper role.
So when you put a job ad out there, I think one of the main objectives is to get somebody interested in that job. You want to get somebody in. That's what I tell a lot of the ODs that we work with. When I look at the job ad, a lot of them look just like every other ad I see. And especially when you're recruiting for something like an associate, which are in high demand these days, a lot of times I'm trying to move the focus toward, let's make it sound like a more attractive opportunity. So it's not something they just scan over, because I think people looking at job ads do the same thing. They can just scan them over real quickly. So getting someone in for an interview, that becoming the goal, what prep work? Because you don't want to drop the ball there either, because that's kind of the next phase of the recruiting process. What prep work should an employer do prior to the interview?
So prior to the interview, so something that we do at IDOC, and I learned this later in my career. So many early in my career, and many hiring managers or those that are new to hiring, whether they're a recruiter or a hiring manager, they'll just cut and paste the job description right onto the job ad. And I learned later in my career that I get similar to, to a recruiter spending a little time on a resume, candidates will also spend a little time on scanning through many opportunities that show up, whether it's on Indeed or LinkedIn. So it's a good practice to keep those, I call them job profiles versus job descriptions. So our job descriptions internally tend to be longer, more in depth, where our job profile or job ad is very different. And we brand it. We use our internal IDOC brand. We include our link to Great Place to Work. And we've heard from a lot of candidates that they've gone to our website, they've gone to our link to Great Place to Work to learn a little bit more about us, because we have to remember candidates are interviewing us as well. So how does your brand show up in the market? So if you can brand that before you actually start the interview process, that's step number one. And we do that at IDOC. We brand our job ads and we make it attractive in the sense of give your candidates a sneak peek into the life of the role, or the life of the role at IDOC. And that's what we've heard from candidates that have interviewed for IDOC, is they had a pretty good feel of our culture, our benefits, who we are as leaders, because we post our videos also on our website. So if a candidate can come to that first conversation already knowing a little bit about who you are, that makes that initial conversation a lot easier, and they come to the table more relaxed.
I like a few things you pointed out from both ends. The candidate having something on their resume like a LinkedIn profile, because excessive amount of information might sound good on one hand, but if nobody's going to take the time to go through all that, it's all for nothing. But having something that connects to something broader. If I really like your resume, now I can take a deeper dive and go look at your LinkedIn resume. But the same with a video, having a job ad where people can go look at the website, look at a video, can be really impactful too, from both sides.
Right.
So,
if you're thinking about, say, any business, and if we're talking specifically about a practice, a video is easy to do. You can just do it from your phone and put it on your Facebook page or your website, and you can even interview some of your employees and your practice and load that up on your website. And it gives, again, a sneak peek into the life of what it would be like to work in the practice.
and I wish we could just get rid of the stock photos on websites because it's so, you might want to go as somebody who's looking to work at a practice. It humanizes it to have pictures of you, your staff, your dog, a video. Some offices have like a practice profile video. I think it really helps you stand apart to have that collateral out there.
Exactly.
So we mentioned before, this is certainly not a perfect science, and these numbers probably aren't absolute, but I'd read once before that and I know we use behavioral-based interviewing as one of the strategies. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit, but I don't know what you'd call it, traditional interviewing or non-behavioral based, that there was very low odds of finding somebody who's going to be a good long-term fit when you're just asking. And this is where I think a lot of employers in our industry will just ask, what days are you available? When can you start? What are your dilation preferences? But that really doesn't tell me anything about the person's character, the person's ethics, attitudes. Behavioral based questions can bump that up to, again, I don't know where this number came from, but about 60%. So it's still not great, but from 10% to 60% is a considerable improvement of getting somebody who's going to be a good fit. So that's just one example, but maybe you could expand a little bit on that, or other things that can be done to improve the chances of a successful hire.
Yeah, it's I think you hit on it, and I've always used this term, is recruiting is both an art and a science. The science is the easy part. It's you look at the resume, you look at the time in the role, the education, skills, certifications. That's a science part of recruiting. And then there's the behavioral science part of interviewing, which is more of the art, where you're using you're trying to deploy as many resources as you can to understand who that person is, and do they align with the role expectations, and do they align with the culture of the organization. So you talked a little bit about behavioral interviewing, and that's just one tool that you can use. And behavioral interviewing, for those that are not familiar with it, it's really just asking the question in a way, how did you behave in this situation in your past employer? So we might ask, hey, were you ever confronted with an ethical dilemma with a previous employer or previous supervisor? And then how did you overcome that ethical dilemma? And by asking those behavioral based, open-ended questions, it leaves opportunity for the candidate to share more about who they are as a character. And you're able to, as the hiring manager, you're able to see how they might behave. We're looking at an ethical dilemma, how they might behave if they were confronted with a similar situation in your business. And so it's past behaviors are typically indicative of future behaviors. And that's why we use behavioral based interviewing. It just helps to identify, to your point, the character of the person and whether they're going to be a good fit for the role or for the company.
And I think I know it helps initially getting really clear on what qualities you're looking for, because it's hard to really go into an interview with the mindset of behavioral based if you don't really know what you're looking for in the beginning. So we have at IDOC what we call core values, which we give a lot of consideration to when we're hiring somebody. Do they have those same core values that's going to make them a good fit? So I think it's worthwhile, if you don't have that, really spending some time thinking about that. What qualities are we looking for? Empathy, team players, getting really clear on just a handful of things. You don't need 27 different core values, but having 3 or 4 things that are somewhat non-negotiable, then that's what you're looking for in the interview. That's what good behavioral based interview questions can really help uncover.
Right. And I think you touched upon an important part, which is that cultural fit. And we do that, and to your point, we do hold that in high regard, especially when you are screening candidates or qualifying candidates for the role. We want to ensure that they're a cultural fit for IDOC, because they could be a fit for the role, but they may not be a fit for IDOC. And so that's something that's really important. So does their values, their core values, do they match up with ours? And something that's really important to understand is what I'm seeing in terms of trends, not only in the market, but trends I'm hearing directly from our candidates that are interviewing at IDOC is culture is becoming one of the defining factors for a candidate making a decision whether or not they're going to accept the job or even entertain an application for a position. And it's surprising that in the last 2 years, it just has become more and more important for candidates. So I think for interviewing for cultural fit, talking about your culture with candidates is important.
Jill, I've heard that over and over, even with the limited time I've spent interviewing candidates. The ones that we did hire later said, I chose this job. I had other offers, but I chose this one because it seemed like a great fit, a great culture that I wanted to be a part of. So there's a lot to be said, again, through the recruiting process, and we'll get to that in a little bit, is we're looking to identify the right qualities in a candidate, but they're sizing us up too.
Absolutely.
As employers. Let's talk about hiring mistakes. And I'm sure we've all made them along the way. There's a lot of them out there. I'll share one with you that I heard at one point. It seemed to make a lot of sense after I heard it. It was to not reveal too much information in the very beginning, because a lot of times people in interviews you want genuine feedback. What you don't want is somebody who's just feeding you information they think you want to hear. So to sit down initially, and I think this is the way a lot of interviewers approach the interview initially is they describe the job and they describe what they're looking for and describe what type of person they're looking for.
Ah,
We're looking for somebody who's good at multitasking and values customer service and likes working with people. And this has potential to shape the feedback, the answers you
exactly.
get from the
Yeah.
other person. I don't want what you think I want to hear. I want
Mhm.
genuine feedback. So, what are some common hiring mistakes that you've discovered?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them, and I've made these mistakes as well. I've seen hiring managers make those mistakes. You learn from your mistakes, and I think the number one mistake that I would say is not following your gut instincts. I've done it myself. I've seen other hiring managers do this. It's going back to that art and science and relying too much on the science and not relying on your gut. Because I've been in many situations where a manager's after they hire somebody and the hire is not a fit, like, well, yeah, I sort of felt that way. And like, oh, you should have followed your gut instinct. Because your gut, that again, this is all human behaviors, and whether it's body language or how somebody answered the question, or there's something nagging in the back of your mind about a response that a candidate gave you that just didn't feel right, just trust your instincts, and balance that with the science part of the interview process, but trust your instincts. And it's sometimes that's hard. I think also I think making and I experienced this early in my career is making decisions or moving through the recruiting process too fast, because especially when you lose somebody, they leave your organization for another job, and initially there's this sense of urgency that I have to fill the position quickly, and sometimes that sense of urgency can lead to a bad hire because you're just looking to fill that position and not looking to fill it with the right person. Because in the end, if you fill it with the right person, they're going to stay longer with the organization. They're going to bring greater value to the organization. So that's a common a mistake. And something that you touched on, which is another it's just it's how we've been trained, and I'll put myself in that camp of how to interview it, that it's this one-sided experience, that the interview is that the interviewer is the person that has sort of the power at the table, and that shouldn't be the case. At IDOC, what we try to do, and what I've learned through my years of experience, is we really want this to be a partnership, because as you mentioned, the candidate's interviewing us just as much as we're interviewing them. And we want this to be more of a dialogue. As soon as the balance, if there's any sort of imbalance in a power position, then the candidate doesn't feel like they're part of the process, and you're not really engaging with the candidate. And the more you create a dialogue with that candidate, you're actually going to get a lot more information out of that candidate and get to know who that person is. Because if you're doing all the talking as the recruiter, and you're not allowing that time for dialogue or allowing that candidate to ask you questions, it's a missed opportunity.
I love the part about the gut instinct. Your gut knows what's going on. And it's the longer
Mhm.
you do this, I think it's that your brain logs away a lot of stuff, that it's
Yes.
subconscious. You don't even know where it's
Mhm.
coming from, but it's your brain trying to tell you that do this or don't do that. And a lot of times there's really something to be said for that. Um, so I like that approach. Uh, and in things have changed a lot in the labor market, especially they were already changing, but having gone through now COVID and
Yeah.
such a whatever we want to call it, labor shortage, or the shift in wherever the shift in labor and where the jobs are at now, has that affected the interview process and the way employers need to engage during interviewing?
Yeah, I believe so. Something that I'm seeing more of, we started doing this early at IDOC because during the height of the pandemic, we moved to remote. So that's one of the reasons why we were earlier in that. In our job ads, we do promote flexibility. We do promote that, we offer remote work, and that attracted candidates for us at IDOC. And so what I'm seeing now and hearing from colleagues within my space, my profession, is that employers are now adding flexibility, whether it's remote or hybrid or any sort of flexibility onto their job ads when they're placing, and that has now become a value added benefit in addition to vacation and sick time, benefits, 401k match. That's now part of that whole total compensation package, because candidates are now looking at that since COVID and the outcome of what COVID has presented. And so we do that to attract our candidates at IDOC, and we put that on our job ads.
I'm noticing that more in eye care too. I think 5 years ago, if you had suggested flexible work arrangements in eye care, OD's practice owners would have laughed at that idea. But now we are seeing some for there's only a certain number of roles that would even be practical for, but in some cases an office manager, maybe a biller, and it's, even if it's not ideal, I'm seeing more willingness to be flexible now with employers to be able to attract and retain more people. I want to close out with one last question here as we're talking things through, and the assumption that the interviewing that the interview process is a process of trying to attract somebody who's going to be a good fit, but you could actually hire somebody who could potentially be a great fit, but drop the ball after. So, and I know some at IDOC we do really well is a lot of communication, a lot of meetings, setting expectations, a lot of feedback back and forth. So I think that's really critical to a successful hire too, is not just getting the right person in there, but making sure that there's a lot of communication moving forward. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that is, I'd like to think that is a key factor of why candidates, we have a really high track record of acceptance at IDOC. We're not 100%, but we're pretty close to 100% acceptance. And that, I believe, is attributed to how we organize our interview process, how we educate our candidates, and how we communicate to our candidates. Communications is key. The moment you talk, that first outreach to a candidate, that's their onboarding experience. That's their first experience with your company. And if it's a great experience that they have during that candidate experience, you're going to get to pull that through to their first day of hire, and they're going to be excited. And so I'm regularly, whether it's myself or we have another person at IDOC that does recruiting. Between the two of us, we're the lead recruiters at IDOC. We regularly communicate to the candidates of, hey, this is what you can expect. This is who you're going to meet. This is who they are. This is how we communicate at IDOC. These are the benefits at IDOC. I mean, we are very transparent as much as we can be with the candidates. And what we hear consistently from a candidate's like, they get this feeling of our culture because they see it through our actions. They get to meet with different colleagues and they hear the same story about who we are. And that also gives them confidence that, oh, this is true. This is everything that I'm seeing on the website. I'm actually experiencing this through the candidate experience. And I think that's why we have a really good track record on acceptances. And something, going back to the comment about, or the question about mistakes, I think a common mistake as it relates to this topic is the drop or the gap in communications, because any candidate going through an interview experience, it can be stressful. It can be filled with anxiety, especially if somebody doesn't have a job. And so what we want to do at IDOC is make them feel comfortable, give them all the tools and the knowledge they need to make a good decision. And gaps in communication. So if you're not following up with a candidate, or there's a long weekend that goes by and you're not touching base with a candidate, candidates will start to create stories in their heads about what the interviewer is thinking, or I'm not going to be hired, and now I'm going to consider another position that's being offered to me. And that's what happens.
Yeah, you've got to deliver, right? You can't just say that we are a XYZ company that believes in this, but actually, as they say, walk the walk.
Right, right.
Well, Jill, this has been great, as I knew it would. When I look at the company, I've been with this company for several years, and I just look at the winning the prestigious Great Place to Work designation. I really applaud the work that, and I know it's a team effort, but I think when you're VP of HR, you get, I'll give you a lot of credit for that, and the leadership team, especially, for really all the hard work that goes into what's not an easy job is building a culture and maintaining it. And it's, as with any business, it's something that needs a lot of, like a plant getting watered. It's something that needs a lot of effort all the time.
True.
It's real easy to lose. And
yeah, it's so funny that you said it, because I always, when I talk about culture, it is like a garden. You have to weed it, you have to nurture it, you have to fertilize it.
Yeah.
It takes work. And I think many companies, or if you're a small company or a small business and you don't know how to create that culture, it can feel overwhelming because it's nebulous. It's like, how do you do that? How do you create? How do you nurture? But it's possible to do it, and I think we've proven that at IDOC.
Well, thank you so much, Jill, for all the hard work you do, and I know people that are in positions of hiring, retaining, and managing people will get a lot out of this, especially in the current work environment.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate you providing me the platform, Steve. And as always, you're just a wonderful interviewer. I appreciate having the conversation with you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for listening. We'll close out here. So if you would like more information about IDOC and how we work with ODs, and on this topic, how our HR consultants can work with you on very similar topics as we've been discussing, you can find out more at idoc.net. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.